Vasilisa the Beautiful. Many years ago, in a certain Tsardom, across 3 times 9 kingdoms, beyond high mountain chains, there once lived a merchant. He had been married for 12 years, but in that time there had been born to him only one child, a daughter, who from her cradle was called Vasilisa the Beautiful. When the little girl was 8 years old, her mother fell ill, and before many days it was plain to be seen that she must die. So she called her little daughter to her, took a tiny wooden doll from under the blanket of the bed, put it into her hands, and said, "My Vasilisa, my dear daughter, listen to what I say. Remember well my last words, and fail not to carry out my wishes. I am dying, and with my blessing I leave to thee this little doll. It is very precious, for there is no other like it in the whole world. Carry it always about with thee, in thy pocket, and never show it to anyone. When evil threatens thee, or sorrow befalls thee, go into a corner, take it from thy pocket, and give it something to eat and drink. It will eat and drink a little, and then thou mayest tell it thy trouble, and ask its advice, and it will tell thee how to act in thy time of need." So saying, she kissed her little daughter on the forehead, blessed her, and shortly after died. Little Vasilisa grieved greatly for her mother, and her sorrow was so deep that when the dark night came, she lay in her bed and wept and did not sleep. At length she thought of the tiny doll, so she rose and took it from the pocket of her gown, and finding a piece of wheat bread and a cup of wine, she set them before it and said, "There, my little doll, take it, eat a little, and drink a little, and listen to my grief. My dear mother is dead, and I am lonely for her." Then the doll's eyes began to shine like fireflies, and suddenly it became alive. It ate a morsel of the bread, and took a sip of the wine, and when it had eaten and drank, it said, "Don't weep, little Vasilisa. Grief is worst at night. Lie down, shut thine eyes, comfort thyself, and go to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening." So Vasilisa the Beautiful lay down, comforted herself, and went to sleep. And the next day her grieving was not so deep, and her tears were less bitter. Now, after the death of his wife, the merchant sorrowed for many days, as was right, but at the end of that time he began to desire to marry again, and to look about him for a suitable wife. This was not difficult to find, for he had a fine house with a stable of swift horses, besides being a good man who gave much to the poor. Of all the women he saw, however, the one who, to his mind, suited him the best of all was a widow about his own age with 2 daughters of her own, and she, he thought, besides being a good housekeeper, would be a kind foster-mother to his little Vasilisa. So the merchant married the widow and brought her home as his wife, but the little girl soon found that her foster-mother was very far from being what her father had thought. She was a cold, cruel woman who had desired the merchant for the sake of his wealth and had no love for his daughter. Vasilisa was the greatest beauty in the whole village, while the daughters of the foster-mother were as spare and homely as 2 crows, and because of this, all 3 envied and hated Vasilisa. They gave her all sorts of errands to run and difficult tasks to perform, in order that the toil might make her thin and worn, and they treated her so cruelly as to leave few joys in her life for her. But little Vasilisa endured all this without complaint, and while the stepmother's 2 daughters grew always thinner and uglier, in spite of the fact that they had no hard tasks to do, never went out in cold or rain, and sat always with their arms folded like ladies of a court, she herself had cheeks like blood and milk, and grew every day more and more beautiful. Now, the reason for this was the tiny doll, without whose help little Vasilisa could never have managed to do all the work that was laid upon her. Each night, when everyone else was sound asleep, she would get up from her bed, take the doll into a closet, and locking the door, give it something to eat and drink, and say, "There, my little doll, take it." Eat a little, drink a little, and listen to my grief. I live in my father's house, but my spiteful stepmother wishes to drive me out of the white world. Tell me, how shall I act and what shall I do?" Then the little doll's eyes would begin to shine like glowworms, and it would become alive. It would eat a little food and sip a little drink, and then it would comfort her and tell her how to act. While Vasilisa slept, it would get ready all her work for the next day, so that she had only to rest in the shade and gather flowers. For the doll would have the kitchen garden weeded, and the beds of cabbage watered, and plenty of fresh water brought from the well, and the stoves heated exactly right. And, besides this, the little doll told her how to make, from a certain herb, an ointment which prevented her from ever being sunburnt. So all the joy in life that came to Vasilisa came to her through the tiny doll that she always carried in her pocket. Years passed till Vasilisa grew up and became of an age when it is good to marry. All the young men in the village, high and low, rich and poor, asked for her hand, while not one of them stopped even to look at the stepmother's 2 daughters. So ill-favoured were they. This angered their mother still more against Vasilisa. She answered every gallant who came with the same words: "Never shall the younger be wed before the older ones." And each time, when she had let a suitor out the door, she would soothe her anger and hatred by beating her stepdaughter. So while Vasilisa grew each day more lovely and graceful, she was often miserable, and but for the little doll in her pocket, would have longed to leave the white world. Now there came a time when it became necessary for the merchant to leave his home and to travel to a distant tsardom. He bade farewell to his wife and her 2 daughters, kissed Vasilisa and gave her his blessing, and departed, bidding them say a prayer each day for his safe return. Scarce was he out of sight of the village, however, when his wife sold the house, packed all his goods, and moved with them to another dwelling far from the town, in a gloomy neighbourhood on the edge of a wild forest. Here, every day, while her 2 daughters were working indoors, the merchant's wife would send Vasilisa on one errand or another into the forest, either to find a branch of a certain rare bush, or to bring her flowers or berries. Now, deep in this forest, as the stepmother well knew, there was a green lawn, and on the lawn stood a little hut on hen's legs, where lived a certain Baba Yaga, an old witch grandmother. She lived alone, and none dared go near the hut, for she ate people as one eats chickens. The merchant's wife sent Vasilisa into the forest each day, hoping she might meet the old witch and be devoured. But always the girl came home safe and sound, because the little doll showed her where the bush, the flowers, and the berries grew, and did not let her go near the hut that stood on hen's legs. And each time the stepmother hated her more and more, because she came to no harm. One autumn evening the merchant's wife called the 3 girls to her, and gave them each a task. One of her daughters she bade to make a piece of lace, the other to knit a pair of hose, and to Vasilisa she gave a basket of flax to be spun. She bade each finish a certain amount. Then she put out all the fires in the house, leaving only a single candle lighted in the room where the 3 girls worked, and she herself went to sleep. They worked an hour, they worked 2 hours, they worked 3 hours, when one of the elder girls took up the tongs to straighten the wick of the candle. She pretended to do this awkwardly, as her mother had bidden her, and put the candle out, as if by accident. "What are we to do now?" asked her sister. "The fires are all out, there is no other light in all the house, and our tasks are not done." "We must go and fetch fire," said the first. "The only house near is a hut in the forest, where a Baba Yaga lives. One of us must go and borrow fire from her." "I have enough light from my steel pins," said the one who was making the lace, "and I will not go." "And I have plenty of light from my silver needles," said the other, who was knitting the hose, "and I will not go." "Thou, Vasilisa," they both said, "shall go and fetch the fire, for thou hast neither steel pins nor silver needles, and cannot see to spin thy flax." They both rose up, pushed Vasilisa out of the house, and locked the door, crying, "Thou shalt not come in till thou hast fetched the fire." Vasilisa sat down on the doorstep, took the tiny doll from one pocket, and from another the supper she had ready for it, and put the food before it, and said, "There, my little doll, take it. Eat a little, and listen to my sorrow. I must go to the hut of the old Baba Yaga in the dark forest to borrow some fire, and I fear she will eat me. Tell me, what shall I do?" Then the doll's eyes began to shine like two stars, and it became alive. It ate a little, and said, "Do not fear, little Vasilisa. Go where thou hast been sent. While I am with thee, no harm shall come to thee from the old witch." So Vasilisa put the doll back into her pocket, crossed herself, and started out into the dark, wild forest. Whether she walked a short way or a long way, the telling is easy, but the journey was hard. The wood was very dark, and she could not help trembling from fear. Suddenly she heard the sound of a horse's hoofs, and a man on horseback galloped past her. He was dressed all in white. The horse under him was milk white, and the harness was white. And just as he passed her, it became twilight. She went a little further, and again she heard the sound of a horse's hoofs, and there came another man on horseback galloping past her. He was dressed all in red, and the horse under him was blood red, and its harness was red. And just as he passed her, the sun rose. That whole day Vasilisa walked, for she had lost her way. She could find no path at all in the dark wood, and she had no food to set before the little doll to make it alive. But at evening she came all at once to the green lawn where the wretched little hut stood on its hen's legs. The wall around the hut was made of human bones, and on its top were skulls. There was a gate in the wall, whose hinges were the bones of human feet, and whose locks were jawbones set with sharp teeth. The sight filled Vasilisa with horror, and she stopped as still as a post buried in the ground. As she stood there, a third man on horseback came galloping up. His face was black, he was dressed all in black, and the horse he rode was coal-black. He galloped up to the gate of the hut, and disappeared there as if he had sunk through the ground. And at that moment the night came, and the forest grew dark. But it was not dark on the green lawn, for instantly the eyes of all the skulls on the wall were lighted up and shone till the place was as bright as day. Seeing this, Vasilisa trembled with fear so that she could not run away. Then suddenly the woods became full of a terrible noise. The trees began to groan, the branches to creak, and the dry leaves to rustle, and the Baba Yaga came flying from the forest. She was riding in a great iron mortar and driving it with a pestle, and she swept away the trail behind her with a kitchen broom. She rode up to the gate and, stopping, said, little hut, stand the way thy mother placed thee, turn thy back to the forest, and thy face to me." And the little hut turned to face her, and stood still. Then, smelling all around her, she cried, "Foo, foo! I smell a smell that is Russian. Who is here?" Vasilisa, in a great fright, came nearer to the old woman, and, bowing very low, said, "It is only Vasilisa, grandmother. My stepmother's daughters sent me to thee to borrow some fire." "Well," said the old witch, "I know them, but if I give thee thy fire, thou shalt stay with me some time, and do some work to pay for it. If not, thou shalt be eaten for my supper." Then she turned to the gate and shouted, "Ho, ye! my solid locks, unlock! Thou, my stout gate, open! And instantly the locks unlocked, the gate opened itself, and the Baba Yaga rode in whistling. Vasilisa entered behind her, and immediately the gate shut again, and the locks snapped tight. When they had entered the hut, the old witch threw herself down on the stove, stretched out her bony legs, and said, "Come, fetch and put on the table at once everything that's in the oven. I am hungry." So Vasilisa ran and lighted a splinter of wood from one of the skulls on the wall, and took the food from the oven and set it before her. There was enough cooked meat for 3 strong men. She brought also from the cellar wine, honey, and beer, and the Baba Yaga ate and drank the whole, leaving the girl only a little cabbage soup and a crust of bread and a morsel of pig. When her hunger was satisfied, the old witch, growing drowsy, lay down on the stove and said, "Listen to me well, and do what I bid thee. Tomorrow, when I drive away, do thou clean the yard, sweep the floors, and cook my supper. Then take a quarter of a measure of wheat from my storehouse, and pick out of it all the black grains and the wild peas. Mind thou dost all that I have bade thee. If not, thou shalt be eaten for my supper." Presently the Baba Yaga turned towards the wall and began to snore, and Vasilisa knew that she was fast asleep. Then she went into the corner, took the tiny doll from her pocket, put before it a bit of bread and a little cabbage soup that she had saved, burst into tears and said, "There, my little doll, take it. Eat a little, drink a little, and listen to my grief. I am here in the house of the old witch, and the gate in the wall is locked, and I am afraid. She has given me a difficult task, and if I do not do all she has bade, she will eat me tomorrow. Tell me, what should I do?" Then the eyes of the little doll began to shine like 2 candles. It ate a little of the bread and drank a little of the soup, and said, "Don't be afraid, Vasilisa the Beautiful. Be comforted. Say thy prayers and go to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening." So Vasilisa trusted the little doll and was comforted. She said her prayers, lay down on the floor, and went fast asleep. When she woke the next morning, very early, it was still dark. She rose and looked out of the window, and she saw that the eyes of the skulls on the wall were growing dim. As she looked, the man dressed all in white, riding the milk-white horse, galloped swiftly around the corner of the hut, leaped the wall, and disappeared. As he went, it became quite light, and the eyes of the skulls flickered and went out. The old witch was in the yard. Now she began to whistle, and the great iron mortar and pestle and the kitchen broom flew out of the hut to her. As she got into the mortar, the man dressed all in red mounted the blood-red horse, galloped like the wind around the corner of the hut, leaped the wall, and was gone. And at that moment the sun rose. Then the Baba Yaga shouted, "Ho, ye my solid locks, unlock! Thou, my stout gate, open!" The locks unlocked, and the gate opened, and she rode away in the mortar, driving with the pestle, and sweeping away the trail behind her with the broom. When Vasilisa found herself left alone, she examined the hut, wondering to find it filled with such an abundance of everything. Then she stood still, remembering all the work that she had been bidden to do, and wondering what to begin first. But as she looked, she rubbed her eyes. The yard was already neatly cleaned, and the floors were nicely swept, and the little doll was sitting in the storehouse, picking the last black grains and wild peas out of the quarter measure of wheat.